The blood had soaked through Fletcher Garrison's shirt by the time he stumbled into the clearing near Deer Lodge, Montana, his horse whinnying nervously behind him. He pressed his hand harder against the gash in his side, cursing the wild steer that had gored him when he had been checking fence lines that morning in September of 1884. The pain was spreading like wildfire through his ribs, and he could feel consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers. Through blurred vision, he saw movement among the tall grass and wildflowers. A woman in a simple brown dress kneeling beside a patch of plants, her hands working quickly as she gathered stems and leaves into a woven basket. Fletcher tried to call out, but his voice came as barely a whisper. His knees buckled, and he fell forward onto the hard earth, hearing the woman's startled gasp before darkness claimed him completely. When consciousness returned, Fletcher found himself lying on something soft, staring up at wooden rafters. The smell of herbs filled his nostrils, strong and medicinal, mixing with the scent of wood smoke. His side throbbed with a dull ache, but the sharp, tearing pain had subsided. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed him back down. "Do not move yet," a woman's voice said, firm but kind. "The yarrow poultice needs time to work, and you have lost considerable blood." Fletcher turned his head to see the woman from the clearing. She was perhaps 25 years old, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical braid and gray-blue eyes that studied him with professional concern. Her face was plain in the way of hard-working frontier women, but there was something striking about her focused expression, the intelligence that shone in her gaze. "Where am I?" Fletcher managed to ask, his throat dry as dust. "My cabin about 3 miles east of Deer Lodge," she replied, dipping a cloth in a basin of water and wringing it out. "I found you collapsed in the meadow where I was gathering herbs. You are fortunate I was there, or you would have bled out before anyone found you." "The name is Fletcher Garrison," he said. "I own the Double G Ranch about 8 miles north of here." "Beatrice Parker," she replied, placing the cool cloth on his forehead. "I know of your ranch. You have been alone there since your father passed 2 years ago." Fletcher nodded slightly, surprised she knew about him. He had kept to himself since his father's death, running the ranch with just a couple of hired hands who came and went with the seasons. The loneliness had become as much a part of him as his own shadow, something he barely noticed anymore until quiet evenings when it pressed against him like a physical weight. "How bad is it?" he asked, gesturing weakly toward his side. Beatrice pulled back the blanket to show him the bandaging. "The wound was deep, but clean. I stitched it closed after cleaning it with golden seal and applying yarrow to stop the bleeding. If you keep it clean and do not strain yourself, it should heal properly. You will need to stay here for at least 3 days." "I cannot have you tearing those stitches open and undoing my work." "I cannot just stay here," Fletcher protested. "I have cattle to tend, horses to feed." "Then you should have been more careful around your livestock," Beatrice said with a matter-of-fact tone that brooked no argument. "I will send word to town. Someone can check on your animals, but you are staying put until I say otherwise." Fletcher wanted to argue further, but exhaustion pulled at him, and he realized he did not have the strength to win this battle. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of Beatrice moving around the cabin, the clink of bottles and jars, the rustle of dried herbs. Despite his frustration at being bedridden, he felt oddly safe here, cared for in a way he had not experienced in years. When he woke again, afternoon light streamed through the cabin's single window. Beatrice sat at her rough-hewn table, grinding something in a stone mortar. The cabin was small but tidy, with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, shelves lined with jars and bottles, and a well-maintained stone fireplace. It had the feel of a place built for purpose and efficiency, every item in its proper place. "You are a healer," Fletcher said, more statement than question. Beatrice looked up from her work. "I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother. We have always known the ways of plants and their properties. When I came west 5 years ago, I found these mountains have different plants than back in Ohio, so I had to learn them all over again. But the principles remain the same." "Why did you come west?" Fletcher asked, genuinely curious. Most single women did not venture to Montana territory without family or a husband. A shadow passed over Beatrice's face. "My mother died of consumption. My father remarried quickly, to a woman who made it clear there was no place for me in their new life together. So I took what little inheritance my mother left me and came here. I had always wanted to see the mountains, and I thought perhaps I could be useful in a place where doctors are scarce." "You have been living here alone for 5 years." Fletcher was impressed despite himself. "I have," Beatrice said, returning to her grinding. "I trade my remedies and healing services for supplies, meat, whatever I need. The people around Deer Lodge have come to trust my skills. I live simply, but I am content." Fletcher studied her as she worked, noting the capable way her hands moved, the calm confidence in her bearing. He had known many women in his 32 years, but few with this kind of self-sufficiency. Most women on the frontier relied heavily on men for protection and provision, but Beatrice Parker seemed to have carved out a life entirely on her own terms. "Does it not get lonely?" he asked quietly. Beatrice paused in her work, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes. But I have found that being alone is better than being with people who make you feel small. At least in solitude, you belong to yourself." Fletcher understood that sentiment more than he cared to admit. After his father's death, several women in Deer Lodge had made it clear they would be interested in becoming Mrs. Garrison, mistress of the Double G Ranch. But their interest had always felt mercenary, focused on his property and status rather than on him as a person. He had retreated into isolation rather than face the hollow prospect of a marriage built on convenience rather than genuine affection. "I know what you mean," he said softly. Beatrice held his gaze for a moment longer, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits. Then she returned to her work, but Fletcher noticed a slight softening in her expression. Over the next 3 days, Fletcher learned much about Beatrice Parker. She rose before dawn to check her herb gardens, which grew in cleared patches around the cabin. She spent hours preparing tinctures, salves, and dried herb mixtures, her movements precise and practiced. She read from a worn leather journal filled with her mother's handwriting, recipes and remedies passed down through generations. Beatrice proved to be an excellent cook, despite her simple provisions. She made venison stew flavored with wild herbs, cornbread sweetened with honey from her own hives, and teas that both soothed and invigorated. She checked Fletcher's wound twice daily, changing the poultice and examining the stitches with a critical eye. "You heal quickly," she observed on the 3rd day. "The inflammation has gone down considerably. You must have a strong constitution." "Years of ranch work builds you up," Fletcher replied. He had been sitting up for the past day, regaining his strength. The wound still pulled uncomfortably when he moved too quickly, but the worst had passed. "Tell me about your ranch," Beatrice said as she rewrapped his bandages. "I have seen it from a distance but never been there." Fletcher found himself talking more than he had in months, describing the layout of his land, the herd of cattle he had been building up, the line of horses he was trying to develop. He told her about his father, a stern but fair man who had taught him everything about ranching, and about his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving a hole in their household that had never quite been filled. My father loved her until the day he died, Fletcher said quietly. He never even looked at another woman. Sometimes I wondered if that was devotion or just inability to let go of the past. Perhaps it was both, Beatrice said. Love and grief are often intertwined. Have you ever been in love? Fletcher asked, then immediately felt intrusive. Forgive me, that is too personal. But Beatrice did not seem offended. I thought I was once back in Ohio. There was a young man who worked at the general store. He was kind and funny, and he seemed to genuinely care for me. But when my mother died and my circumstances changed, he suddenly became scarce. I realized his affection had been dependent on my father's standing in the community and the prospect of a comfortable life. When those things disappeared, so did he. He was a fool, Fletcher said with conviction. Beatrice smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Perhaps, or perhaps he was simply honest about what he wanted. At least he did not marry me under false pretenses. In any case, I learned an important lesson about the difference between affection and genuine love. That evening, Fletcher insisted on sitting at the table for dinner rather than remaining on the cot. Beatrice protested but eventually relented, helping him move slowly across the cabin. They ate together as equals for the first time, and Fletcher found himself not wanting the meal to end. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on everything from the politics of Montana Territory to their favorite seasons to the challenges of frontier life. I should be able to return home tomorrow, Fletcher said reluctantly as Beatrice cleared the dishes. You have done more for me than I can repay. Payment is not necessary, Beatrice said. Healing is what I do. Still, I would like to do something to thank you properly, Fletcher persisted. Perhaps I could bring you meat from my next hunt, or help with any heavy work around your cabin. Beatrice hesitated, and Fletcher could see her natural independence warring with practicality. There are a few things that would be easier with help, she admitted. The woodpile needs splitting and stacking before winter. And there is a leak in the roof I have been trying to patch, but it requires climbing up there with supplies. Then I will return in a few days, once I have checked on my ranch and made sure everything is in order, Fletcher promised. It is the least I can do. The next morning, Fletcher prepared to leave. His wound still pulled when he moved, but he could walk without assistance. Beatrice provided him with extra bandages and a jar of salve, along with detailed instructions for care. Change the dressing daily, she instructed, standing in the doorway of her cabin as Fletcher mounted his horse, which Beatrice had retrieved and cared for during his stay. If you see any signs of infection, redness, heat, unusual discharge, come back immediately. Do not wait and hope it improves on its own. Yes, madam, Fletcher said with a slight smile. You are quite fierce when it comes to healing. Infection kills more men than the original wounds, Beatrice said seriously. I do not want my work wasted because of male stubbornness. Fletcher laughed, then winced as the movement pulled his stitches. I will be careful, I promise, and I will return in 3 days to help with that wood pile. As Fletcher rode away, he found himself looking back at the cabin, at Beatrice standing in the doorway watching him go. Something had shifted during those 3 days, something he could not quite name but felt in his chest, warm and persistent. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 2 years had lifted somewhat, and he realized with surprise that he was already counting the hours until he could see her again. The Double G Ranch was in good order when Fletcher arrived. His hired hand, an older man named Samuel who lived in a small bunkhouse on the property, had managed the essential tasks. The cattle were fine, the horses fed and watered, and nothing urgent needed attention. You look like hell, Samuel observed when Fletcher gingerly dismounted. What happened? Fletcher explained about the steer and the wound, though he found himself reluctant to say too much about Beatrice. Samuel listened, nodding thoughtfully. "That would be the Parker woman," Samuel said. "Heard she has got a gift with healing. My cousin's wife went to her last spring when she had trouble with a baby coming. Miss Parker gave her some kind of tea and treatment, and everything worked out fine. The doctor in Deer Lodge had said there was nothing to be done." "She is remarkable," Fletcher agreed, then busied himself checking the horses to avoid Samuel's knowing look. Over the next 2 days, Fletcher found his thoughts constantly drifting to Beatrice. He remembered the focused way she worked, the quiet confidence in her voice, the rare smile that lit up her face. He thought about how comfortable he had felt in her cabin, how easy their conversations had been. He had not realized how starved he was for genuine companionship until he had experienced it. On the 3rd day, Fletcher loaded tools and supplies into his wagon and headed to Beatrice's cabin. He arrived in late morning to find her working in one of her herb gardens, carefully cutting stems and placing them in her basket. She looked up at his approach, shielding her eyes from the sun, and Fletcher felt his heart lift at the welcome in her expression. "You came back," she said, rising to her feet and brushing dirt from her skirt. "I promised I would," Fletcher replied, climbing down from the wagon. "How is the healing business?" "Busy. I had 3 patients yesterday alone. A child with croup, a man who caught his hand in a thresher, and an elderly woman with joint pain. The usual ailments." Beatrice walked over to inspect him critically. "How is your wound healing? See for yourself," Fletcher said, unbuttoning his shirt enough to reveal the bandaging. Beatrice stepped closer, her fingers gentle as she peeled back the dressing. Fletcher was acutely aware of her proximity, the concentration on her face, the warmth of her breath. "Excellent," Beatrice pronounced. "You have been taking care of it properly. The stitches can come out in another week or so." They spent the rest of the day working together. Fletcher split and stacked wood while Beatrice continued her garden work, though she frequently paused to bring him water or to remind him not to overexert himself. The wound pulled uncomfortably with the repetitive motion, but Fletcher found he did not mind. There was something deeply satisfying about this kind of simple, honest work, made better by Beatrice's presence nearby. When the woodpile was complete, Fletcher examined the roof leak. It was indeed beyond Beatrice's ability to fix alone, requiring someone to hold the ladder steady while another person worked above. Beatrice proved to be a capable assistant, handing up supplies and offering suggestions. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, falling into an easy rhythm. "There," Fletcher said finally, climbing back down the ladder. "That should hold through the winter, but I will check it again before the first snow just to be certain." "You do not need to do that," Beatrice protested, but Fletcher could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "I want to," Fletcher said honestly. "Besides, you might have another patient who needs carrying in from a field, and I would hate to miss the excitement." Beatrice laughed, a sound Fletcher was coming to treasure. "I hope that does not happen again. You were quite heavy." "How did you manage to get me here?" Fletcher asked, suddenly curious. "I am not a small man." "Your horse helped," Beatrice admitted. "I got you partially up, then convinced your horse to kneel, and I draped you over the saddle. Then I led the horse back here and managed to slide you off onto the cot. It was not graceful, but it worked." Fletcher shook his head in amazement. "You are quite resourceful." "Necessity breeds resourcefulness," Beatrice replied. "Living alone teaches you to solve problems creatively." They shared dinner again that evening, and Fletcher found himself reluctant to leave even as darkness fell. The cabin felt warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of herbs and the crackling of the fire. Beatrice told him stories of unusual cases she had treated, and Fletcher shared tales of ranch mishaps and the characters who passed through Deer Lodge. The conversation flowed as easily as it had before, punctuated by comfortable silences. "I should go," Fletcher finally said, though he made no move to stand. "It is a dark ride back." "You could stay," Beatrice said, then quickly added, "on the cot, I mean, as you did before. It is quite dark now, and the trail can be treacherous." Fletcher knew he should refuse, that staying again would be pushing the bounds of propriety. But he found himself accepting, drawn by the prospect of more time in Beatrice's company. They talked late into the night, the fire burning low, sharing more about their lives, their hopes, their disappointments. Fletcher told her about the loneliness of the ranch, how it sometimes felt like he was just going through motions, working to maintain something without knowing why. "My father built that ranch with his own hands," Fletcher said quietly. "He poured his whole life into it. After my mother died, it was all he had left. I feel obligated to keep it going, to honor his memory. But sometimes I wonder what I am really working toward. What is the point of building something if you have no one to share it with? You could marry," Beatrice suggested gently. "Surely there are women in Deer Lodge who would be interested." "Interested in the ranch, perhaps," Fletcher said, "but not in me. I have seen the way they calculate, assessing property and prospects. I do not want a marriage based on ledgers and land deeds. My parents loved each other truly, despite their hardships. I would rather be alone than settle for less than that." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. "I understand," she finally said. "I have had similar offers over the years. Men who need a housekeeper or a mother for their children, who see my healing skills as useful. But no one who sees me really sees who I am and wants that person specifically." Their eyes met across the dimly lit cabin, and Fletcher felt something profound shift in his chest. Here was someone who understood, who shared his values, who wanted what he wanted. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Beatrice," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. But she stood quickly, moving to bank the fire. "It is late. We should sleep. You can head home in the morning." Fletcher recognized the retreat for what it was and did not push. But as he lay on the cot later, listening to Beatrice's soft breathing from behind the curtain that divided the cabin, he knew with certainty that his feelings for her had grown beyond simple gratitude or friendship. He was falling in love with Beatrice Parker, and the knowledge both thrilled and frightened him. Over the following weeks, Fletcher found reasons to visit Beatrice's cabin regularly. He brought her venison from his hunts, helped repair a fence around her garden, and insisted on checking the roof before the first snow. Beatrice, for her part, seemed to welcome his visits, always having fresh bread or stew ready, always finding time to sit and talk despite her busy healing practice. The town of Deer Lodge began to take notice. Samuel mentioned with studied casualness that people were talking about how often Fletcher's wagon was seen heading toward the Parker cabin. Martha Henderson, who ran the general store, made pointed comments about how nice it was that Fletcher was finally taking an interest in someone, and wasn't Miss Parker such a capable woman. Fletcher did not care about the gossip. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, looking forward to each day, to each visit with Beatrice. They had fallen into an easy companionship that felt natural and right. Beatrice shared her knowledge of herbs, teaching Fletcher to identify useful plants. Fletcher taught her about ranching, explaining the intricacies of breeding cattle and training horses. But beneath the comfortable friendship, tension grew. Fletcher caught himself watching Beatrice as she worked, admiring the graceful movement of her hands, the way afternoon light caught in her hair. He saw the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the way she found excuses to touch his arm or shoulder. They were circling something neither seemed ready to name. The breaking point came in late October. Fletcher arrived at the cabin to find Beatrice distraught, pacing in front of her fireplace. A young woman from town had died the night before from complications of childbirth, despite Beatrice's best efforts to save her. "I tried everything," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Every remedy I know, every technique my mother taught me, but the bleeding would not stop. I could not save her, Fletcher. She died, and her baby died, and her husband is left alone with 2 small children." Fletcher did not hesitate. He crossed the cabin and pulled Beatrice into his arms, holding her as she wept against his chest. "It was not your fault," he said firmly. "You cannot save everyone, no matter how skilled you are." "But I should have been able to," Beatrice sobbed. "What good is all this knowledge, all these remedies, if I cannot help when it matters most?" "You have saved so many people," Fletcher reminded her, stroking her hair. "That child with croup, the man with the thresher injury, me when I was bleeding in that meadow. You do more good than you realize." Beatrice pulled back slightly to look up at him, her face wet with tears. "Do you truly believe that?" "I know it," Fletcher said. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever met, Beatrice Parker. You are intelligent, capable, compassionate, and strong. The work you do matters, even when you cannot save everyone." Something shifted in Beatrice's expression, vulnerability giving way to a deeper emotion. "Fletcher," she whispered. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "I have been trying not to say this, trying to be respectful and patient, but I cannot hold it in any longer. I love you, Beatrice. I have loved you since those first days when you cared for me, maybe even since that first moment when I saw you in the meadow. You have healed more than just my wound. You have healed the loneliness I did not even realize was killing me." Beatrice's breath caught. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid that you would eventually leave or that I would lose my independence. But I cannot deny it anymore. I love you, Fletcher Garrison." Fletcher lowered his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as Beatrice responded. Years of loneliness and longing poured into that kiss, all the unspoken feelings they had been dancing around for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Fletcher said, the words surprising even himself. "I know it is fast, and I know you value your independence, but I promise you I do not want to own you or change you. I want to build a life with you where we are partners in everything. Your healing work would continue, and the ranch house is certainly big enough for your herbs and remedies. We could be alone together instead of alone separately." Beatrice laughed through fresh tears, these ones of joy. "That is quite possibly the least romantic and most practical proposal ever made." "Is that a yes?" Fletcher asked hopefully. "Yes," Beatrice said, kissing him again. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Deer Lodge. The town turned out in surprising numbers, clearly approving of the match. Martha Henderson cried openly, declaring it was about time both of them found happiness. Samuel stood as Fletcher's witness, grinning broadly throughout the entire service. Beatrice moved to the Double G Ranch, bringing with her dozens of jars, bottles, bundles of herbs, and her precious journal of remedies. Fletcher had cleared out a room off the kitchen for her workspace, installing shelves and a large work table. Beatrice's eyes had filled with tears when she saw it, touched by his thoughtfulness. Their marriage exceeded Fletcher's hopes. Beatrice continued her healing work, with people now coming to the ranch instead of her cabin, which they had decided to keep as a place to grow and process herbs. Fletcher found himself helping with her work, learning to identify plants, assisting with simple remedies, and providing muscle when patients needed to be moved or held still. In turn, Beatrice involved herself in ranch life. She learned to ride well, often accompanying Fletcher as he checked fence lines and cattle. She had a good eye for evaluating livestock and proved surprisingly adept at breaking horses, having a gentle touch that calmed even the most nervous animals. But it was the small, daily intimacies that Fletcher treasured most. Waking up beside Beatrice each morning, her dark hair spread across the pillow, sharing meals and conversation after long days of work. The way she would lean against him in the evenings as they sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders. The absolute rightness of having her in his life, filling the empty spaces he had not realized he carried. Winter arrived with heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Fletcher and Beatrice spent long evenings by the fire, talking, reading aloud to each other, and making plans for spring. They spoke of expanding Beatrice's herb gardens, perhaps taking on an apprentice to help with the healing work. Fletcher wanted to increase his horse breeding operation, and Beatrice enthusiastically supported the idea, offering to help train the young animals. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Fletcher confessed one evening. Beatrice curled against him on the sofa he had brought back from town as a wedding present to themselves. "For so long, I felt like I was just existing, going through motions. But now, everything has purpose and meaning." "I feel the same," Beatrice said, tilting her head to kiss his jaw. "I thought I was content living alone, but I realize now I was just surviving. You have given me a real home, Fletcher. Not just this ranch, but a place where I truly belong." Their first year of marriage brought challenges along with joy. A harsh spring storm killed several head of cattle, putting financial strain on the ranch. Beatrice worked extra hours treating patients to bring in additional income. Fletcher took on work helping neighbors with their round-ups and brandings, swallowing his pride to accept the wages they offered. But they faced these challenges together, supporting each other through frustrations and setbacks. When Fletcher came home exhausted and discouraged from a grueling day, Beatrice was there with a hot meal and gentle encouragement. When Beatrice lost a patient despite her best efforts, Fletcher held her through her grief, reminding her of all the lives she saved. By their first anniversary, the ranch was back on solid footing. Fletcher's horse breeding program was gaining a reputation for producing strong, intelligent animals that sold for good prices. Beatrice's healing practice continued to grow, with people traveling from increasingly distant places to seek her remedies. On a warm evening in early September, exactly 1 year after Fletcher had stumbled bleeding into that meadow, they returned to the spot where they had first met. The wildflowers were in bloom again, swaying in the gentle breeze. Beatrice knelt to examine the plants, selecting a few choice specimens for her basket, just as she had been doing when Fletcher found her. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Fletcher asked, sitting on a boulder nearby. "If I had not been gored that day, if you had not been gathering herbs right then, we might never have met." "I think about it often," Beatrice admitted, coming to sit beside him. "It seems impossible that chance could lead to something so significant." "But perhaps it was not chance. Perhaps it was meant to be. Destiny," Fletcher asked with a slight smile. "Or simply two lonely people being in the right place at the right time to find each other," Beatrice replied. "Does it matter which? The result is the same." Fletcher pulled her close, breathing in the scent of herbs and sunshine that always clung to her. "No, it does not matter. I am just grateful, whatever the cause." That autumn brought news that Montana would likely achieve statehood soon, transforming from territory to full state. Deer Lodge was growing, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Fletcher and Beatrice found themselves at the center of the community, respected for their hard work and integrity. Fletcher was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association, representing the interests of smaller ranchers. Beatrice was asked to teach basic healing techniques to interested women, sharing knowledge that could save lives in emergencies. They both took these responsibilities seriously, seeing them as ways to contribute to the community that had embraced them. In the spring of 1886, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Fletcher with joy and terror in equal measure. He remembered his mother's death, how his father had nearly broken from the loss. The thought of losing Beatrice was unbearable. Beatrice, practical as always, addressed his fears directly. "I am healthy and strong," she reminded him. "I know the signs of complications and how to address them. We will get through this together." "But you have seen how quickly things can go wrong," Fletcher protested. "What happened to that young woman last year?" "That woman had complications from her previous birth that weakened her," Beatrice explained patiently. "I have none of those issues. And I have already started taking raspberry leaf tea to strengthen my womb. I have delivered dozens of babies, Fletcher. I know what I am doing." Fletcher tried to take comfort in her confidence, but anxiety gnawed at him throughout the pregnancy. He became protective to the point of annoyance, trying to prevent Beatrice from doing any heavy work or seeing difficult patients. Beatrice tolerated his concern for a few weeks before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said firmly. "I will not spend the next several months being treated like an invalid. I know my limits and I will respect them. But you must respect my judgment and my ability to care for myself." Chastened, Fletcher backed off, though he could not completely suppress his worry. He channeled his anxiety into preparing for the baby, building a beautiful cradle from oak and making sure the house was thoroughly weatherproofed before winter. Samuel found the whole thing amusing, frequently teasing Fletcher about his nervous energy. In December, during a heavy snowstorm, Beatrice went into labor. Fletcher sent Samuel racing to town to fetch Martha Henderson, who had assisted with many births and whom Beatrice trusted. Then he did his best to follow Beatrice's calm instructions, heating water, gathering clean linens, and generally trying not to panic. Martha arrived within an hour, snow-covered but cheerful. She took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency, working alongside Beatrice to manage the labor. Fletcher was relegated to pacing in the main room, listening to the sounds from the bedroom and feeling completely helpless. After 6 hours that felt like 6 years, he heard a baby's cry. Fletcher's heart nearly stopped. Then Martha appeared in the doorway, beaming. "Come meet your son," she said. Fletcher entered the bedroom on shaking legs to find Beatrice propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. The baby's face was red and scrunched, dark hair plastered to his skull. He was the most beautiful thing Fletcher had ever seen. "His name is Franklin," Beatrice said softly, "after your grandfather." Fletcher Jr. seemed too confusing. Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at his son. "He is perfect," he whispered, "and you are incredible. I have never been so frightened in my life." "I told you I knew what I was doing," Beatrice said with a tired smile. "Though I will admit, it was more difficult than I anticipated. Experiencing it yourself is quite different from assisting others." Over the next months, Fletcher discovered the particular exhaustion and joy of new parenthood. Franklin was a healthy baby, but demanded constant attention. Fletcher found himself walking the floor at night, bouncing his son and singing off-key lullabies while Beatrice caught precious hours of sleep. During the day, he strapped Franklin to his chest in a carrier Beatrice had fashioned, going about ranch work with his son nestled against him. Beatrice continued her healing work, though she scaled back significantly during Franklin's first months. She had trained 2 young women from town in basic remedies, and they handled simpler cases, coming to Beatrice only for complicated situations. The arrangement worked well, giving Beatrice time with Franklin while ensuring people still had access to healing. As Franklin grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Fletcher's reputation as a horse breeder continued to grow, with buyers coming from as far as Wyoming and Idaho. Beatrice's healing practice remained busy, and she began writing down her remedies in a more organized fashion, hoping to eventually publish a book of frontier medicine that others could use. They fell into a rhythm of life that felt both comfortable and fulfilling. Mornings began with family breakfast, Franklin chattering in his high chair while Fletcher and Beatrice discussed the day's plans. Days were spent in respective work, coming together for meals and breaks. Evenings were for Franklin, playing with him, teaching him about the world around him, reading stories before bed. Nights were for each other, reaffirming the love and partnership that formed the foundation of everything else. When Franklin was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time, Fletcher managed his anxiety better, trusting in Beatrice's knowledge and strength. Their daughter, whom they named Rose after Fletcher's mother, arrived on a beautiful spring morning in 1889. The birth was easier than Franklin's, and Beatrice recovered quickly. "Our family feels complete," Beatrice said a few days after Rose's birth, watching Fletcher hold their daughter while Franklin peered curiously at his new sister. "I have everything I never knew I needed. Everything I stumbled into while bleeding in a meadow," Fletcher said with a grin. "Best accident of my life." The years flowed by in a steady stream of seasons and milestones. Franklin grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Rose proved to have her mother's gift with plants, even as a small child showing interest in Beatrice's herb gardens. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in Montana, which had achieved statehood in 1889. Beatrice published her book of remedies in 1892, a modest volume titled Practical Healing for the American Frontier. It sold steadily, helping people across the West treat common ailments and injuries. She was proud of the accomplishment, knowing she was preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Fletcher expanded the ranch's operations, buying additional land and increasing both cattle and horse herds. But he never let work consume him the way it had his father. Family remained his priority, and he made sure to spend time with Beatrice and the children every day, no matter how busy the ranch became. They faced sorrows along with joys. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep in 1893, leaving a hole in their lives. Martha Henderson passed the following year after a short illness, despite Beatrice's best efforts. These losses reminded them of life's fragility and made them treasure their time together even more. In 1895, when Franklin was 9 and Rose 6, Beatrice surprised Fletcher with the news that she was pregnant again. Both of them had assumed their family was complete, but they welcomed this unexpected addition. Their second son, whom they named George after Fletcher's father, arrived healthy and strong that autumn. 3 children, Fletcher marveled, watching his family gathered around the fireplace one evening. Franklin was reading to Rose from an adventure novel while Beatrice nursed baby George. "When I was alone on this ranch, I could never have imagined this. We have been blessed," Beatrice agreed. "I think back to that frightened woman who left Ohio, so determined to prove she could survive alone. If she could see this life, she would hardly believe it." "You did not just survive," Fletcher said, moving to sit beside her. "You thrived, and you helped me thrive too. We saved each other, I think." As their children grew, Fletcher and Beatrice made sure to tell them the story of how they met, of Fletcher stumbling wounded into that meadow and Beatrice's healing skills saving his life. The story became family legend, embellished slightly with each retelling, but always concluding with the same truth. Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected circumstances. Franklin showed aptitude for ranching, absorbing everything Fletcher taught him about horses and cattle. Rose displayed remarkable skill with healing, learning remedies from Beatrice, and showing the same intuitive understanding of plants her mother possessed. George, as he grew, proved to have a gift for mechanics, fascinated by the increasing number of mechanical devices appearing in Montana as the century drew toward its close. The turn of the century found Fletcher and Beatrice in their late 40s, still healthy and active. The ranch was well established, the children thriving, and their love as strong as ever. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, always together, always supporting each other. On a September evening in 1900, exactly 16 years after that fateful day in the meadow, Fletcher and Beatrice rode out together to the place where they had met. It had become their tradition to visit on their anniversary, a pilgrimage to the spot that had changed both their lives. The meadow was much as it had been that day, wildflowers swaying in the breeze, mountains rising in the distance. They dismounted and walked hand in hand through the tall grass, comfortable in the silence of shared memory. "You have any regrets?" Fletcher asked, a question that had become part of their anniversary ritual. "None," Beatrice replied, as she always did. "You?" "Not a single one," Fletcher confirmed. "Though I could have done without the getting gored part." Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow. "Fair enough. Though if you had not been gored, we might never have met." "Then I suppose I should be grateful to that steer," Fletcher said, "though I never did find out which one it was. Probably sold it for beef years ago." They sat on the same boulder where they had sat 16 years before, watching the sun descend toward the mountains. Fletcher pulled Beatrice close, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked, sensing his reflective mood. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Fletcher said honestly. "That loneliness I felt before we met, it seems like a lifetime ago now. Like it happened to a different person. You healed more than just my wound, Beatrice. You healed my entire life." Beatrice turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "And you healed mine. I thought I was fine living alone, but I was only half alive. You gave me love, family, a home that is more than just a building. You gave me a partner in every sense of the word." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, when they needed it most. The years had added lines to their faces and gray to their hair, but the love between them had only deepened, maturing into something solid and enduring. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, lights glowing welcomingly in the windows, Fletcher reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He thought about that lonely man who had bled in a meadow, believing he was dying alone. He thought about the woman who had been living in solitude, convinced she needed no one. How wrong they had both been, and how fortunate that circumstances had brought them together. Life continued its steady rhythm through the next years. Franklin married a local rancher's daughter in 1903, a capable young woman named Alice who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far end of the Double G property, planning to eventually take over the main ranching operations as Fletcher gradually retired. Rose, at 19, announced her intention to attend a women's medical college in Philadelphia, determined to combine her healing knowledge with formal medical training. Fletcher worried about his daughter traveling so far, but Beatrice supported the decision enthusiastically. "She has a gift," Beatrice told Fletcher. "And in this new century, women are beginning to have opportunities we never dreamed of. We should encourage her, not hold her back out of fear." Fletcher knew Beatrice was right, though it was difficult to watch Rose board the train east. She promised to return with her degree and practice medicine in Montana, serving the communities that still desperately needed trained healers. George, at 13, was already talking about studying engineering, fascinated by the automobiles and electrical devices that were slowly making their way to rural Montana. Fletcher could barely comprehend the changing world his youngest child was growing into, but he supported George's dreams as he had supported all his children. In 1905, Franklin and Alice presented Fletcher and Beatrice with their first grandchild, a daughter they named Beatrice in honor of her grandmother. Holding his granddaughter, Fletcher felt the circle of life completing itself, the family he and Beatrice had built continuing into another generation. "We have built something lasting," Beatrice said, watching Franklin carefully hold his daughter, the same wondering expression on his face that Fletcher remembered from when Franklin was born. "Not just the ranch, but a family rooted in love and respect. That is a greater legacy than any amount of land or money." As Fletcher entered his 60s, he gradually turned over more ranch operations to Franklin, though he still rode out daily to check on things and help where needed. Beatrice continued her healing work, training apprentices, and updating her remedy book with new knowledge. They had achieved a comfortable semi-retirement, with time to enjoy each other's company and watch their grandchildren grow. Rose returned from medical school in 1908, one of only a handful of female doctors in Montana. She set up practice in Deer Lodge, combining traditional frontier remedies with modern medical knowledge. Beatrice worked alongside her daughter several days a week, proud of what Rose had accomplished. George left for college in 1910, heading to a technical school in California. His letters home were filled with excitement about new inventions and possibilities. Fletcher barely understood half of what his son wrote about, but he was proud nonetheless. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, Fletcher and Beatrice hosted a large celebration at the ranch. Family and friends gathered from across Montana to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Franklin made a toast, speaking about how his parents had shown him what a real marriage looked like, built on mutual respect, love, and partnership. "They saved each other," Franklin said, raising his glass. "And in doing so, they built a legacy that will continue through generations." To Fletcher and Beatrice Garrison, the best parents and the best example anyone could ask for. As Fletcher looked around at the gathering, at his children and grandchildren, at the friends who had become like family, at Beatrice beside him still beautiful in his eyes, he felt overwhelming gratitude. The lonely rancher who had once believed he would die alone in a meadow had instead found a love that transformed his entire existence. The war in Europe cast a shadow over the next years, though Montana was far from the battlefields. George enlisted in 1917 despite Fletcher and Beatrice's concerns, serving in the Army Corps of Engineers. He returned home safely in 1919, having seen horrors but emerged intact, ready to apply his skills to building rather than destroying. As the 1920s dawned, Fletcher and Beatrice entered their 70s, still active but slowing down. Fletcher no longer rode out daily, content to advise Franklin on ranch management. Beatrice had fully retired from healing, leaving that work to Rose, though people still sometimes came asking for her wisdom on particularly difficult cases. They spent their days together, often sitting on the porch watching ranch activity, sharing meals, reading, or simply enjoying each other's presence. The conversation never ran dry, even after nearly 40 years of marriage. They still found new things to discuss, new observations to share. "I never tire of you," Fletcher told Beatrice on a warm summer evening, both of them rocking gently in chairs he had made years before. "That surprises me sometimes. I thought marriage might become routine or boring, but with you, it never has." "Because we have never stopped seeing each other," Beatrice replied. "We have grown and changed over the years, but we have grown together, paying attention to who the other person is becoming. That keeps love fresh." In 1922, they celebrated their 40th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. Their children had offered to host another large celebration, but Fletcher and Beatrice preferred intimacy, a chance to reflect on their journey together. 40 years, Fletcher marveled, looking at Beatrice across the table. "It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all." "The best 40 years of my life," Beatrice said. "I would not change a single moment, even the difficult ones. They all led us here to this place of contentment and love." They returned to their meadow one last time that September, riding slowly on gentle horses. Fletcher was 73, Beatrice 70, both still healthy but feeling their age. The meadow was unchanged, wildflowers blooming as they had for decades. "I hope our grandchildren bring their children here someday," Beatrice said, standing in the spot where she had first seen Fletcher fall. "I hope they tell the story of how a lonely rancher and a healing woman found each other and built a life together." "They will," Fletcher assured her. "Franklin already tells the story to his children. It will become family lore, passed down through generations. People will remember that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that healing takes many forms." They stood together in the meadow, surrounded by the beauty of the Montana landscape they both loved, hands clasped, hearts full. The journey that had begun with blood and pain had led to a life rich with love, family, and purpose. They had saved each other in that meadow 38 years ago, and they had continued saving each other every day since. Fletcher and Beatrice lived into their 80s, rare longevity for their generation. They remained at the ranch, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The Double G Ranch prospered under Franklin's management, and the family healing tradition continued through Rose and her own children. On a peaceful morning in 1929, Fletcher passed away quietly in his sleep, Beatrice beside him as she had been for 47 years. He was 80 years old, and he died as he had lived his later life, surrounded by love. Beatrice mourned deeply but without bitterness. She had been blessed with nearly 5 decades with a man who had loved her completely, who had seen and valued her exactly as she was. She lived another year, spending time with family, organizing her papers and remedies, and making sure her knowledge was properly recorded for future generations. On a September morning in 1930, exactly 46 years after she had first seen Fletcher fall in the meadow, Beatrice took a walk to that special place. Rose, concerned about her mother wandering alone, followed at a distance. She watched as her mother stood in the meadow, face turned toward the sun, a peaceful smile on her lips. Beatrice sat on the boulder where she and Fletcher had spent so many anniversaries, and there she passed away quietly, her journey complete. Rose believed her mother had gone to that place deliberately, choosing to end where the story had truly begun. They buried Beatrice beside Fletcher on a hillside overlooking the meadow, 2 simple headstones marking their resting place. The family placed a small bench nearby, and over the years it became a place of pilgrimage for descendants wanting to feel close to the couple whose love had started it all. The story of Fletcher and Beatrice became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. How a lonely rancher had been gored by a steer and stumbled into a meadow. How a woman gathering herbs had saved his life with her remedies. How that chance meeting had blossomed into a love that sustained them through nearly half a century, healing wounds both physical and emotional. Franklin's son wrote the story down in 1950, interviewing family members and reading Beatrice's journals to capture the details. The account was published as a small book, selling modestly but touching everyone who read it. The story resonated because it was true, because it showed how love could emerge from pain, how two lonely people could find completeness in each other. The Double G Ranch remained in the family for generations, each owner maintaining the meadow as a kind of shrine, protecting the wildflowers and natural beauty. The family tradition of healing continued through Rose's line, with several descendants becoming doctors or nurses, carrying on Beatrice's legacy of caring for others. The old ranch house still stands today, lovingly maintained by Fletcher and Beatrice's great-great-grandchildren. Visitors can see Beatrice's workroom, preserved much as she left it, shelves lined with jars and bottles, dried herbs hanging from rafters. Fletcher's tools remain in the barn, and the cradle he built for Franklin has rocked 6 generations of babies. In the meadow where it all began, a simple plaque now stands, placed there by the family in 1975. In this meadow in September 1884, Fletcher Garrison and Beatrice Parker first met. Their love, built on mutual respect and partnership, became the foundation for a family and a legacy that continues today. May all who visit here remember that the greatest healings come not just from remedies, but from love freely given and gratefully received. The story of the lonely rancher and the healing woman endures because it speaks to something universal: the human need for connection, the transformative power of love, and the possibility of finding completeness in another person. Their descendants tell the story with pride, knowing that their own existence stems from that chance meeting in a Montana meadow, when a wounded man fell and a skilled woman stopped to help, and 2 lonely lives became one beautiful journey together.